Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Artemis finds Naruto in the Forest of Death. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by JINX777 and link in description and support writer. Let's start the video. Chapter 1 Child of the Forest. Life was never easy for Naruto Uzumaki. From the day he was born, people couldn't stand the sight of him. Some would glare as he passed, some would pull their children away and tell them not to go near him, and some even resorted to violence if they had too much to drink. It wasn't the way he looked, at least not completely, because he was a little odd. The 6-year-old had an almost wild look to him with his unruly blonde hair, fang-like teeth and slighted sky-blue eyes. He even had sharp, claw-like nails on the end of his fingers, and on each of his cheeks were 3 whisker-like birthmarks. His clothes were little more than rags, a brown shirt that had once been gray and black shorts. No, the main reason people hated him was that he reminded them of what happened on the day of his birth. The day Naruto was born, the village was hit with a terrible earthquake that destroyed almost half the village and killed many people. Because of that, and the way he looked, Naruto was seen as a bad omen, the more superstitious villagers blaming him for the disaster, along with pretty much everything else that went wrong in the village since. No matter where he went, the blonde child could always feel the eyes of the villagers glaring at him, their hate seeming to crawl under his skin and cling to him every second of every day. No matter where he was, no matter what he did, Naruto could never escape those eyes. These were the thoughts running through his head as he limped towards the alleyway he slept in, his right eye bruised and a small cut on his left leg, after a man decided that he needed to be taught a lesson, his bare feet dragging slightly on the hard ground. The sky was dark, with the exception of the stars, the moon not appearing tonight. For a while he just lay in the pile of rags he had used to make a bed for himself, using a few to bind his leg to stop the bleeding. It was a cold night, nothing he did seeming to warm his small body as he curled into a ball and shook. When he first heard it, Naruto thought it was his imagination. The wind was strong and howling through his alley, sapping even more of the warmth from his bones. But when he heard it again, the whiskered blonde lifted his head, eyes scanning the area to make sure no one was around. Come. A single word, little more than a whisper, carried on the wind, but he heard it almost as if it was shouted in his ear. Come. This time there was a pulling sensation in his chest, almost as if something was compelling him to follow the wind as it rushed by him, pulling at his clothes. Slowly getting to his feet, his legs still hurting, Naruto did as the wind said, letting it tell him where it wanted him to go by the way it hit his body. It was a slow process made even slower by his injured leg. Before he even realized it, Naruto found himself outside the village, walking through the training grounds that the ninja used, the wind seeming to get even stronger the closer he got to his destination, the whisper seeming to get more urgent. Come, hurry, come. Without warning, the wind, which had gone into a frenzy by this point, settled back down into a gentle breeze. He looked towards the large, fenced-off forest in front of him, the pull he felt in his chest, seeming to grow even stronger as he looked into the many shadows that lay between the trees. Just being near it seemed to make his body tingle, filling him with a need to run towards it, into the trees, and just run until he couldn't anymore. Come. Not needing to be told again, Naruto ran to the fence, the pain in his leg forgotten, and with skill that didn't seem natural climbed it in seconds, using both his hands and feet, before jumping to the other side and running off into the trees. The tingling sensation he had before growing stronger and stronger the deeper he went, his body full of energy, his mind clearer than it had ever been in his short life. He didn't notice that his leg and eye were healed, or even when he started running on all fours like an animal, moving through the trees in a way no human should be able to, nor did he care when he did, it just felt so right. Deeper and deeper he ran, at one point giving a jump that should be impossible for a child not training to be a ninja, and started jumping through the trees, switching between running and jumping. The only thing on his mind being to find the voice that carried on the wind. The closer he got, the more energy he felt flowing through his veins, getting to the point that he felt his body might exploded. His ears were filled with the sound of music, though he didn't know what the instrument that was being played was, and the sound only seemed to fill him with even more energy. Then he stopped running, the frantic energy running around inside of him settling into a calm, steady flow. Naruto jumped from a tree and landed at the edge of a large clearing, with a large stump in the center, and all around him the blonde could see wild animal gathering. He saw tigers, deer, wolves, hawks, eagles, rabbits and every other animal imaginable. They seemed to think nothing of the others in the clearing, all starting at the stump in the center with dazed, unblinking eyes. That was when his eyes took in the man sat on the stump, though man might not be the right word for him. He had long blonde hair that seemed to resemble a lion's mane, with long curling ram horns sticking out of either side of his head. From the waist down he was covered in golden fur that looked so soft Naruto needed to make a conscious effort not to reach out and touch it, and instead of feet were a pair of goat hooves. The man's face, like the rest of him, had a wild, ageless appearance, with a long blonde beard that melded into the rest of his hair. His sharp teeth were clearly in view as he smiled towards the small blonde around a strange instrument, the source of the music. Tied to a string hung over his shoulder, Naruto could see a pure white horn with a gold mouthpiece that seemed to shine even through the only light in the sky came from the stars far above. His light blue, slided eyes seemed to shine with joy, something that he had never felt directed at himself before. Naruto didn't even notice that he was walking forward until he was stood only a few feet from the strange goat man, his eyes just as foggy as the animals around him as he sat down and just listened to the music as it floated around the forest, drawing in more and more animals. He didn't know how long he sat there, but when Naruto next looked up into the sky, it's starting to turn red and orange, indicating that the sun was rising over the horizon. When the music stopped, Naruto, along with all the other animals that had gathered, let out a small cry of sadness as the last note faded into the air. The animals left not a moment later, disappearing into the shadows between the trees as if they were never there, leaving just him and the goat man left in the clearing. After letting go of the instrument, which the blonde could now see was tied to a string around his neck, the man sent him a warm smile as he leaned forward. "I have waited a long time to meet you, Naruto." His voice sounded as smooth as honey, and Naruto couldn't help the small smile that crossed his lips when he heard it, hearing it, still in a slight daze. "Do I know you?" At the innocent question the man chuckled, his eyes once again shining with joy as he reached forward and ruffled the small boy's hair gently. "I know you, but now is not the right time for you to know me. I don't understand." Chuckling again, the strange goat man jumped off the stump and knelt down next to him and without warning, wrapped his arms around the boy's shoulders in a hug. "You will, one day, but until then you should sleep. It's been a long night." Naruto didn't realize it until the man spoke, but he was tired, his eyes suddenly hardly staying open. With a yawn, the blonde boy leaned into the goat man's chest as he fell asleep. Smiling down at small boy in his arms, Pan let out a small sigh as he picked him up and held him to his chest. "I'm sorry I couldn't come sooner, Naruto, and that I can't keep you with me, but soon the gods will need your help, more than they know, my son." Without warning, Pan's body started to glow gold before he, with Naruto still in his arms, disappeared into thin air, the only thing left to prove he was ever there to being the wildflowers that had sprung up around his feet. When Naruto woke up he was along in a clearing, though he knew it wasn't the one from before because it was smaller and the trees were different and more spaced out. He still felt the energy running through his body, though it was weaker than before and could still feel it racing through his body. Sitting up, he saw that he had been lying on a bed of moss and the sun was high in the sky with hardly any clouds. Standing up to stretch the kinks out of his muscles, Naruto took in several deep breaths, savoring the early morning air, before walking in the direction of a small stream he could hear in the distance, but stopped when he felt his foot hit something on the ground. On the floor at his feet Naruto saw a bow, with quiver full of arrows, along with a small hunting knife, the same type of instrument he had seen the strange goat man playing the night before, and a hooded fur cloak. The bow was made from a dark brown, almost black wood, and was polished to perfection, yet didn't reflect any of the light that hit it, while the quiver seemed to be made of some kind of animal hide that he didn't recognize, that had light brown fur covering it. When he pulled out one of the arrows he noticed that the shaft was made from the same wood as the bow with dark brown feathers at the end, with a small but shape arrowhead. Some were made from a strange brown metal, while others just seemed to be normal iron. The knife was small, with strange bronze veins running through the metal, and looked to be more for skinning than killing, with a leather handle that was a little big for his hand. Turning to the cloak, Naruto took a moment to feel the soft brown fur that I was made from before putting it on, leaving the hood down, as he enjoyed the warmth it gave him, and a strange tingling sensation in his gut. Shrugging his shoulders, the blonde slung the quiver onto his back with the bow and arrows inside it, before finally turning to the instrument. It was made with several different size pieces of hollowed out wood, tied together with a cord hanging off of it so that it could hang around his neck. The moment Naruto's hand touched it, his head was filled with information that hadn't been there before. He learned that the instrument was called pan pipes, and even how to play them as if he had known his entire life. Frowning slightly, he decided to not to question it for now, and after hanging them around his neck started making his way towards the stream. Naruto spent the next 3 years living in the forest, not that he was really keeping count of the days. He never felt a need to leave or find people, more than happy to just live off of the land, sleep in the trees and just live his life. He even made friends with several of the local animals, which he had discovered shortly after arriving he could understand and communicate with. It wasn't speech exactly, but he knew what they were saying to him. He was also able to copy any sound he heard perfectly, whether it was an animal or just the sound of the wind blowing through the trees. Another thing he had discovered was that when he played his pan pipes he was able to control plants, if only to a certain degree, and like the night he had met the goat man was able to mesmerize animals, though not to the same level as the man. He spent hours practicing using the bow and arrows he had found, which he found out the arrows returned to the quiver on their own, and had gotten very good at making clothes out of animal skins. He had long outgrown his old clothes, replacing them with a fur vest and pants. The cloak never needed to be replacing because it seemed to grow to fit him perfectly. The only bad thing about his life was the monsters. The first one had appeared about 3 months after he arrived, a large black dog about the size of a horse, with pure red eyes and huge teeth. When he had first seen it, Naruto had almost died because he had frozen in place from shock and fear. The dog had charged straight at him, and he was only just able to roll out of the way at the last second before climbing a tree to escape it. It took several arrows before he realized that the only ones that could hurt it were the ones made from the strange bronze metal, and he had almost fallen out of the tree when it had burst into golden dust, leaving nothing but a fang behind. After that they had started coming every other week. Sometimes it was another dog, other times it was giants with one eye with the IQ of a peanut, and that was being generous. Once he had even seen a strange giant lizard with 9 heads, that one he had hidden away from until it left, something telling him not to fight it. So many different monsters came looking for him that he had stopped counting, just killed what he could, hid from what he couldn't, and collected what was left behind. It got to the point that he needed to make a bag just to hold all of the trophies that he had collected over the last 3 years. The only thing he hadn't seen for the last 3 years were people, the strange girls that he would sometimes see running through the trees not counting, because they seemed to actually live inside them. They never spoke to him or got close, almost as if they were afraid of him, but he had seen them watching him at times, especially when he used his panpipes to help a tree or plant grow, with the same dazed expression on their faces as the animal. Which was why he was so surprised when 3 kids came running through his clearing, tired and scared, their eyes seeming to dart around to take everything in. One of them seemed to be around his age, a skinny blonde boy with elfish features and blue eyes, a girl that looked a little older with short black hair, electric blue eyes, and what Naruto remembered was called a goth look. The last of the group was a small girl several years younger than the other 2, with blonde hair falling to the middle of her back and gray eyes. From his perch in a tree above them, Naruto could see that they were in bad shape. The oldest girl seemed to have a deep cut on her left arm that was bleeding, and they all looked ready to drop. Then he heard the sound of something running through the forest, something that didn't belong. He wasn't surprised when 4 of the black dog monsters came crashing into the clearing, eyes locked on the 3 children, and drool dripping from their fanged mouths. He could hear the blonde girl whimpering quietly as the dogs moved towards them, not in any rush now that they had caught up to their prey. He saw the older girl with the injury standing in front of her friends, acting as a human shield between them and the beasts, a sword in her hand made from the same metal as his special arrows, as the boy stayed with the younger girl with his own sword to protect her. Without warning, one of the dogs pounced, heading straight for the black-haired girl, its mouth open in preparation to take her arm off, only for it to burst into golden dust just before it reached her. For a moment both the kids and the remaining dogs seemed to be in shock at what had happened, then Thalia saw the single arrow sticking out of the ground where the hellhound had been. Before she had time to think about where it came from, 3 more arrows shot out of nowhere and hit the other hellhounds, killing them instantly. She turned to check that both Luke and Annabeth were okay, never getting out of her ready stance in case whatever killed the hellhounds attacked them next. Luke looked just as confused as she did. The son of Hermes was looking around the clearing like her, trying to find who or what had saved them. Then she looked at Annabeth. The young blonde girl was staring into a tree to their right, her eyes wide and mouth open. Quickly turning towards what she was looking at, Thalia felt her own eyes widen at what she was seeing. Crouching on a branch in a tree on the edge of the clearing they had stumbles into was a boy, wearing a fur cloak with a hood pulled up to cover his hair, bright blue eyes and 3 lines on each cheek. He looked to be around her and Luke's age, and had a wild look about him. Then she saw the bow in his hand and the knife strapped to his ankle. It seemed that everything about the boy screamed dangerous. Slowly lowering her swords, motioning Luke to do the same now that he had seen the boy as well, Thalia waited for him to speak. For a moment nothing happened, blue eyes locked on blue eyes. Then without warning the boy dropped off the branch, grabbed it with his free hand, hung in the air for a moment, before dropping silently to the ground in a crouch. They all stiffened slightly when they saw him reaching a hand behind his back, but relaxed when he pulled out a small fur pouch and a water skin, before he walked over to Thalia and forced her to sit on the ground by pushing down on her shoulder. For a moment she resisted, but after another quick staring contest put her sword away and sat down, though Luke stood guard in case he tried anything. The moment she sat on the ground the hooded boy grabbed her left sleeve and ripped it off. "Hey, what the hell?" Seeming to ignore her complaint, Naruto took a moment to examine the wound, opening the small pouch and pouring some cut-up leaves into his hand. When he was happy with the amount the blonde tipped the herbs into his mouth, followed by a mouthful of water, and spent about a minute chewing it into a thick green paste. When that was done he spat it back into his hand and, before she had time to protest, put his hand over the cut and rubbed it in. The moment the paste touched the open wound, Thalia let a small scream at the stinging sensation, making both Luke and Annabeth stiffen, but it only lasted for a moment before it went numb and the bleeding stopped. After waiting a moment to make sure it was working, Naruto started bandaging the cut with some more fur he had cut just for such a purpose. When he was done, Thalia could only stare with confused eyes as he pushed the pouch and water skin into her hands, not entirely sure what was going on, but after a moment her voice came back. "Thanks, I'm Thalia, this is Luke and Annabeth. What's your name?" Without showing any sign that he had heard her, Naruto turned away and walked over to the golden piles of dust, picking up the teeth left over from the hellhounds and putting them into another pouch he had pulled out from under his cloak. When he had done that, the hooded boy pulled his hood down, showing the three his bright blonde hair that trailed down to his shoulders. They waited several minutes, but the strange blonde still didn't even look in their direction, so, waiting while her friend sat on the ground next to her, Thalia rubbed her shoulder absent-mindedly before looking back to the blonde boy. "We were switching between our bases when the hellhounds caught our scent, they've been chasing us for about 5 hours." Still no answer. "How long have you been here?" It was like he couldn't hear anything they said, not meeting their eyes as he started to pile up wood in preparation for a fire, before Naruto took out 2 stones and rubbed them together to get a spark. They fell into silence after that, realizing that he might not actually be able to understand anything they said, Thalia and Luke keeping an eye on the boy who they were positive was a demigod like them, though they weren't sure who his godly parent might be. They watched as he started the small fire with dry wood so that there wasn't any smoke, before looking at Annabeth and frowning slightly. They had been so deep in thought neither had even noticed the sun setting or that the wind had picked up. Poor Annabeth was shaking like a leaf, her torn clothes affording her little in the way of warmth. They moved closer to the fire, sitting as close to each other as they could to share their body heat, the small blonde girl between her 2 older friends. The frown still in place, Naruto got up and walked to the edge of the clearing and without slowing climbed one of the trees, his fingers and toes gripping the spaces between the bark easily. They lost sight of him for a moment as he disappeared into the branches before something fell to the ground with a thump, followed by another. They were followed a moment later by Naruto. When he returned to the fire, the blonde tossed one of the bundles towards the 3 kids, which turned out to be a thick blanket made out of fur, big enough for the 3 of them to fit under with ease, before he sat back down on the other side. After covering themselves with the blanket, they watched as Naruto unwrapped the other bundle he had thrown down from the tree, revealing a pile of sliced meat. After taking several pieces for himself, the blonde threw the rest over the fire towards the 3 demigods, along with 3 stick with the bark stripped and the ends sharpened. Luke was about to thank him when the words froze in his throat, eyes widening as he watched the boy pick up a piece of uncooked meat and eat it, giving them their first glimpse of his sharp, fang-like teeth. Sending a worried look to Thalia, who was sending him one of her own, they both started to stick their meat on the sticks and cook them over the fire, Luke holding Annabeth's and his own. As they waited for the meat to cook, Thalia decided to break the silence by asking their blonde host another question, even though she knew it was unlikely he would answer her. "Why don't you cook your meat?" Still ignoring them, Naruto wiped a bit of blood from his mouth with his thumb before looking at the black-haired girl over the fire, his face all but devoid of expression. Frowning slightly when he still didn't speak, Thalia decided to just ask the biggest question on her mind, if for no other reason than to get it out. "So who's your parent?" Still nothing. "Why aren't you talking to us, are you just so stupid you can't even talk?" It was the first time since he met them that Annabeth had spoken, and she was glaring at him as if he had done something wrong. All Naruto did was glance in her direction for a moment before turning back to his meat. After a while the whiskered boy shrugged his shoulders and, using another of his water skins to put out the fire, walked over to one of the trees at the edge of the clearing and climbed into it to sleep for the night. The 3 young demigods had spent a week in the clearing with Naruto so far, though he didn't say a word to them and didn't seem to care that they were there. It was nice, not have to be constantly moving around to avoid monster attacks and just taking some time to rest. Thalia's arm had healed after the 2nd day, the herbs their new blonde friend had given her seemed to work perfectly and it didn't even leave a scar. Then again, friend might not be the right word. The blonde really didn't seem to care about anything, except maybe the forest. He shared his food and water, gave them his blanket and even gave them some of his spare cloaks he had made, but even after a week he treated them like strangers, barely even looking at them. It was like there was an invisible wall around him, keeping them from getting close. Both she and Luke had spent hours watching him, the way he moved, almost like he was a part of the forest itself. They had never seen a human, demigod or not, that could climb a tree like he did. Sometimes he seemed more like a wild animal than a person. They hadn't even seen him sleep in the last few days, he always waited until they dozed off and woke up the next day before them. They still had no idea who his godly parent could be, not that they had met many. Annabeth seemed to hate him with everything she had, having given him the nickname Barbarian after their first night and refused to go anywhere near him, saying that she didn't want his stupidity to pass on to her. Both the older demigods had tried to reason with her, but the fact was she was still young and didn't see things the way they did. The fact was that he had been living wild on his own for who knew how long, which meant he was smart enough to survive both the elements and any monsters that came looking for him. At the moment the three were watching the whiskered blonde cutting up a doe he had dragged into the clearing only a few minutes before, its eyes empty and a wound in its chest, from where an arrow had pierced its heart. He used the small knife that they had seen tied to his ankle with practiced ease, expertly skinning it before cutting up the edible meat and putting what couldn't be used into a pile on his right. In a matter of minutes he had finished his work. But what he did next confused them as, pulling 3 bags made out of fur from under his cloak, the blonde spilt the meat between the 3, then tossed them each a bag with a full waterskin tied to it. "Oh." That was the first word he had spoken to them since they met him, and for reasons she couldn't understand the daughter of Zeus got a cold feeling down her spine. His voice was quiet and brittle, as if he hadn't used it for so long his mouth had forgotten how to form words, struggling to even get the one out. After getting over their shock at the fact he could actually speak, the 3 demigods quickly started to pack when the sound of a tree falling in the distance reached her ears. In that one sound she understood what was happening, monsters were coming, and from the sound of it big ones. They had just finished packing when the daughter of Zeus turned back to the blonde and, stopping suddenly when she saw that instead of packing he was lashing his knife, which she now realized had celestial bronze melted into it, to the end of a branch to use as a makeshift spear. "What are you doing? We have to go, they'll be here soon." "Not coming." His words got the attention of Luke and Annabeth, who were now a few feet in front of Thalia and had stopped to stare at the wild boy, as if he was insane. Naruto didn't even look up from tying his knife to look at them. "Oh." Running up and grabbing him by the shoulders, shaking him slightly as she did, Thalia got right in his face and glared at him, blue eyes meeting blue eyes. "I'm not going to leave you here to get yourself killed." Pushing her away from him, causing her to trip and fall on the ground, Naruto glared down at the older girl for a moment before quickly glancing back up at her 2 friends, who were sending both of their worried looks. In that one moment, Thalia understood what he was saying, even if he didn't do it with words. He was telling her to take the others and run, to leave him behind while he brought them time that she had no doubt would cost him his life. Run. Without waiting for a reply, Naruto ran off in the direction of the crashing sounds, which were getting closer and closer by the second, leaving the 3 demigods alone in the clearing without looking back as they watched him run towards almost certain death. Thalia, with a sad but grateful expression on her face, Luke with a terrified look and tears in his eyes, and most surprisingly Annabeth, crying her eyes out and screaming for the barbarian to come back as the 2 older demigods held her back from running after him. The surprise that crossed the One-Eye's faces when Naruto threw his spear at one of them, turning him to dust before running between them and grabbing the spear before running in the opposite direction, would have been funny if he had time to savor it. He could hear their angry roars as they chased after him, their large feet leaving dents in the soft soil as they ran. The first part of his plan was working, get them away from the others. Now he just needed to stay ahead of them until he could implement the second part. Unfortunately for Naruto, the one-eyed, 10-foot-tall giants chasing him had different plans. When the first boulder came towards him, the blonde was able to dodge it by swinging off of a tree and changing direction at the last moment, the large projectile sailing harmlessly past him before knocking over a tree, but after that it got harder. The 4 One-Eyes kept throwing boulders, trees and anything else they could get their hands on at him, forcing Naruto to dodge and change direction to avoid getting hit. The problem with that was that it was making it harder and harder for him to keep going in the direction he wanted to go. It got to the point that Naruto knew he would need to stop and face them, the 4 giants having already closed the distance between them even with his speed and acrobatics, so landing in a small clearing about 200 feet away from where he was heading, the blonde turned around and thrust his spear into the chest of the one-eye that was about to slam its fist into him. Before the dust had even settled on the ground, he was forced to jump back as another fist came charging towards him, before rolling to his right to avoid the large foot that tried to stomp him into the ground. When he got back to his feet, Naruto turned to face the 3 remaining monsters, their eyes glaring at him with both hunger and hate. The first one had a large brown afro on top of his head, with bones sticking out of it in random places and a hairbrush knotted into the top. He had 2 tusk-like teeth jutting out of his mouth from his bottom lip and a small beard on the bottom of his face. He was wearing a glittery sliver vest with the buttons undone, though that was probably because of his large gut, making it impossible to close, and a pair of white shorts that looked like they might explode at any second. The next on seemed to be made of nothing but curly black hair, his entire body was covered in it, with the exception of a small area around his eye and mouth. The only clothing he wore was an old cloth as a loincloth, and in his right hand was a small tree that he was using as a club. The last one eye, unlike his friends, was completely bald, his head seeming to actually shine where the sun hit it. He was wearing blue overalls covered in grease, with a dirty cloth stuffed into the top pocket and the right sleeve torn off. The first to attack was the hairy one, his club raised high in the air in preparation to smash the small blonde. Waiting until the last second, Naruto jumped onto the club, stabbing the one eye in the arm as he used it as a springboard before doing a somersault over its head and stabbing it behind the left knee when he landed behind him. That was how it worked. Nature, if a predator couldn't outright kill its prey, they would go for the legs first, then wear it down for the kill. But before he had the chance to finish it off, Naruto was sent flying across the clearing by the one eye with the afro from a backhand, hitting a large boulder before falling to the ground with a pained grunt. Getting up quickly, ignoring the pain in his side, the blonde pulled out his bow and started shooting arrows into the bold one eye's knees as he came charging towards him, seeming intent on ramming into him and crushing him against the boulder he had just hit. It slowed the giant down enough for him to roll to the left, resulting in the one eye running head first into the with a loud creak, splitting it in two from the force. While the bold one eye was dazed, Naruto quickly returned his bow to the quiver on his back, grabbed his spear and thrust it into the one eye's side, turning it into dust before running out of the clearing. He could hear the two remaining one eyes following behind him, pushing threes out of their way as they got closer and closer as their large strides countered his speed. Reaching his destination, Naruto had just enough time to smile before rolling to his right to dodge another boulder thrown at him before it went flying over the edge of the cliff he was stood in front of, his back pressed to a tree out of their line of sight. Moments later, the one eye came running out of the trees and, not seeing the drop in time, the hairy one eye ran straight off it, screaming as he fell before it was cut off when he hit the river and burst into dust. Seeing what happened to his friend, the afro one eye came to a stop just at the edge of the cliff, tittering for a moment before regaining his balance and turning to glare at the blonde boy he had ran past. Not giving the monster a chance to get his bearings, Naruto ran forward, jumped into the air, and slammed both his feet into the one eye's chest. The kick was just enough to throw off his balance once again and, just like his friend before him, fell backwards over the cliff. Breathing deeply, the pain in his side returning in full now that the adrenaline was leaving him, Naruto lay on the ground for a few minutes panting before slowly pulling himself back up, limping back into the forest and to his clearing. As he walked, the pain slowly started to fade, like it always did when he was in the forest, until it was nothing more than a dull ache. He wasn't sure how much time had passed now since he had sent the three away, his mind had long forgotten how time worked, just living in the moment and enjoying his life. He had fixed the damage the one eyes had done while chancing him, making it as if they had never been there. It wasn't hard, all he needed to do was play the fallen trees some music on his panpipes, and they would slowly fix themselves, the local animals and tree ladies always gathering to listen when he did. He had been happily lounging in a tree above his clearing, looking up at the lights in the night sky without a care in the world, he couldn't remember what they were called, but he liked them. Then his thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of a large group of humans. The moment he heard them getting closer, Naruto climbed higher into the tree so that he was hidden by the foliage. There were about 20 of them, all dressed in the same silver jackets with hoods, white skirts that fell to just below their knees, with bows and arrows on their backs. They all seemed to be young girls, the oldest no more than 15, and out of all of them only two stood out. The first was the oldest girl, who had long black hair tied into a plait that fell down to her waist and had a silver circlet on top of her head. Her skin had a light tan, and her face seemed to be constantly set in a frown as she watched the other girls set up camp. The other was a girl a little younger, with long red hair, shimmering silver eyes and the most peaceful expression on her face. Naruto didn't know what it was about her that made her stand out. It was like she had an aura around her that he couldn't stop looking at. But then he realized that they were setting up camp in his clearing. The main problem with this was that there were so many of them, they would overhunt his forest, killing too many animals to eat. If that happened, it would take years for the balance to return to normal. He couldn't let that happen. Frowning slightly at the large group, the blonde took a moment to think before taking in a deep breath, then let it out in the sound of the roar he had copied from the strange dogs monsters that he had killed, making sure to throw his voice so they didn't know he was there. The plan was to scare them off without being seen, and the moment the sound left his lips, the group of girls froze, quickly pulling out their bows and aiming an arrow into the surrounding darkness between the trees, none seeming to bother looking up. Waiting a moment, the next sound he made was from a large lizard he had once seen, but chose not to fight, that it had several heads. Letting out a hissing sound in a way that it sounded like more than one, Naruto crouched lower into the tree when he saw the widening of several of the girls' eyes, happy that his plan seemed to be working. Down in the clearing, several of the less experienced hunters were starting to panic as the sound of several different monsters echoed around them in the darkness. Artemis could only frown in slight confusion as she listened to the different calls, something not sitting right in her stomach. She had brought her hunters here because this forest hardly ever saw monster, the fact that it was in such good condition proving that to be true. Even now she couldn't actually feel any within 300 miles of their position. The plan was to come here and train up her 3 newest hunters, the large amount of wildlife in the area, making it the perfect place to practice hunting. It didn't make any sense, she knew for a fact that there were no monsters in the area, but all around her she could clearly hear them. Finally having enough, the goddess of the hunt closed her eyes and listened to the sounds around her, her bow at the ready. It took several minutes for her to realize what was wrong, the calls of the monster were perfect, exactly like the creatures that made them, too perfect. There was no variation in the sounds, no change of pitch in the slightest. They were being tricked. When she realized this, it was child's play to pinpoint where the noises were originating from. Turning her attention to the top of one of the tree at the edge of the clearing, Artemis quickly brought up her bow and fired into the tree, drawing the attention of her hunters as she did so. The moment the arrow disappeared into the branches, the sound stopped, the air suddenly becoming completely silent. But the thing that surprised her was that instead of the sound of her arrow hitting flesh, she heard it hitting the trunk of the tree with a dull thud. She had missed. She never missed. Before the hunter had time to aim at the tree themselves, a shadow shot out of the branches and into the tree next to it, before repeating the action to the next. Whatever this thing was, it was fast. None of the hunters were able to get a clear view of it as it jumped from tree to tree, circling them several times before finally landing on the ground and running straight into the camp. Before any of them realized what was happening, the shadow was in front of Artemis, who without thinking, slammed her hand into its chest and threw it back to the edge of the clearing, where it hit a tree hard enough to almost break it. It was at that moment that the cloud that had been blocking the moon passed, letting it shine its pale light down into the clearing they were in and finally letting them see their attacker. The boy. The pure disgust that was in her captain's voice was easy to hear, and it was mirrored by several others seconds later. Artemis stood back and watched, hiding her own shock at the finally seeing the attacker, as Zoe ran over and lifted the injured boy up by his neck, holding him against the tree. Now that they could all see him clearly, the goddess realized that he was young, no older than 10, and had a wild look to him that was only enhanced when he started growling at Zoe with a heated glare, his lips pulled back in a snarl and showing them all his fang-like teeth. "Who art thou? How dare thee intrude in the huntress's camp?" The only response she got was the sound of a hellhound's roar coming from the boy's throat as he started to claw at her wrist like a wild animal. "No more tricks. Speak now, boy." To emphasize her point, the dark-haired huntress slammed the boy into the tree hard enough to make him cough blood, but he still didn't speak. He just kept glaring at them all, growling like a wild animal and clawing at the hand on his neck. Having seen enough, Artemis walked forward, Zoe letting the boy go instantly and backing away with a bowed head, her eyes never leaving the boy as he fell to the ground and coughed up more blood. The red-headed goddess stopped a foot away from the boy, her face impassive as she looked down at him. "Why did you attack us? Answer now or I will turn you into a jackalope and be done with you." This time instead of using a hellhound, the blonde, his hood having fallen off when Zoe dropped him, looked up at her and hisses like a hydra. But it was at that moment, when she saw his slighted blue eyes, that Artemis realized that the boy in front of her was completely wild. Taking a moment to look around the clearing, the goddess of the hunt saw several animal skin bags hanging from the trees and the slight indentations in the grass around the clearing that showed something moved through the area often. It seemed that they had set up camp in the wild boy's territory. "You go." Turning her attention back on the boy, his eyes still glaring at her without any fear, Artemis let a small frown cross her lips. "Excuse me?" Seeming to struggle with the words, the hunters watched in silence as the boy spoke, some glaring at him, but a few sending him confused looks. "Too many hunt my home." At the word home he gestured at the clearing around them. None of the hunters seemed to understand what he was saying, but Artemis did. His mindset seemed to be like a wild animal, he was scared of them, scared because a larger group of predators had invaded his home and he thought they would exhaust the food source because there were so many of them. This caused Artemis to let out a deep sigh. It was true she disliked men, she found them untrustworthy and disgusting as a whole, but unlike some of her hunters was not blind to the fact that there could be exceptions. This boy was an innocent, little more than a wild animal. He had attacked them in fear, with no malicious intent. It was clear he was a demigod, feel the godly tint in his blood, though she had no idea whose, and that he had been alone for a long time. It actually impressed her, the fact he was still alive, and if his collection of sounds was anything to go on, he had seen his fair share of monsters. But then her eyes landed on something hanging around his neck that had fallen out from under his brown cloak, something that made her eyes widen in shock. Panpipes. "That's impossible, no one has seen him in hundreds of years and he has never had a demigod child, it can't be." Pan was one of the few men she didn't find completely disgusting, not to say he didn't have his moments. Her nephew was a good man or goat, and before he disappeared, they had been on several hunts together. After all, their domains crossed into each other's. The thought of this boy being his child shocked her, but why else would a wild blonde-haired, slighted blue-eyed demigod have panpipes? Turning to her captain, who seemed to have also noticed the pipes and had wide eyes locked on the boy's face, taking in his wild appearance, Artemis clearing her throat to get her attention. Tell the others he is not to be harmed. I must return to Olympus and find Hermes at once. Do not hunt before I get back and treat his wounds. Keep him in my tent until I return. Though she didn't look too happy about it, Zoe nodded her head in understanding before turning away when her mistress ran out of the clearing and disappeared in a flash of light. Chapter 2 The Hunt and the Hunter. Artemis couldn't help but frown at her family as she sat in the throne, listening to her father arguing with her uncle Poseidon, while her twin and Hermes told each other jokes. What had been a quick visit to tell her brother Hermes that she might have a lead on his son Pan had somehow turned into a full-blown meeting, though she wasn't sure how long it would last when she finally got to give her news. The fact was that her father, along with several of the other Olympians, didn't really care about the affairs of minor gods. Their arrogance knew no bounds, and their heads should have been the size of cities, just more proof that most men weren't worth her time. That's not to say a few of the women didn't feel the same way, but still. When everyone had quieted down, Zeus turned to his daughter with a small frown and without a word motioned for her to speak. My hunters and I have found something interesting. Shortly after setting up camp in a clearing we were attacked. At first it seemed several monsters were closing in on us from every direction, but it turned out to all be coming from one thing, a boy demigod with blonde hair and blue eyes that had gone wild. Let me guess, you turned him into a jackalope. Ignoring Apollo's comment, though she did send him a heated glare, Artemis continued as if she hadn't been interrupted. She also didn't miss the way several members of her family sent a regretful look towards Hermes, who they guessed was the boy's father based on the general description. Do not misunderstand, when I say wild I mean he is almost completely unable to speak, though it seems he is able to copy the sound of others. Even his appearance is wild. It seems that he was attempting to scare us away as we had set up camp in his home and he feared we would exhaust his food source. But the reason I came to talk to Hermes is not because I turned him into a jackalope, it is because of the fact that he had panpipes hung around his neck. Just as she had expected, several of the gods and goddess lost interest when they realized what this was about, Ares just getting up and walking out. She also wasn't surprised by the fact that both Hermes and Apollo's eyes widened in realization at the mention of the musical instrument, both leaning forwards in their thrones. After all, Pan was Hermes' son, and her brother had always said he was his favorite nephew. She also saw her uncle Poseidon and her aunt Demeter paying attention, though her father just seemed to frown slightly. Impossible, Pan has been dead for many years, and even then he had never created a demigod child. You must be mistaken. Frowning at her father for doubting her, the red-headed goddesses of the moon flicked her hand, and a large sliver circle of light appeared in front of her, before the image appeared inside it of a spiky-haired blonde boy, with slighted blue eyes, whisker marks on his cheeks, and fang-like teeth. The other gods and goddesses could see what she had meant about him looking wild, the birthmarks on his cheeks, seeming to only increase the feeling that they were looking at a wild animal. She saw the small smile on Hermes' face when he saw the boy, no doubt thinking just how much he looked like his father, and didn't miss the single tear that trailed down his cheek. With another wave of her hand the image disappeared. He is currently in my camp being watched by my hunters. The moment I realized who he was I came to inform Hermes, knowing that he would want to know. Wait, you left him with your hunters? Are you insane? They are all man-haters, they'll kill him if he so much as looks at them. Turning to Apollo with a frown, something that seemed to be her normal expression when dealing with her twin brother, Artemis just glared at him for a moment before answering. They have orders not to harm him while I am gone, they will not disobey me. He is being kept in my tent until I return. That was a bad idea. This time turning to look at her least favorite aunt, who seemed to be busy painting her nails, Artemis frowned at the sing-song way she spoke and the smile on her lips, as if she knows something she didn't. Why is that? Finally looking up from her nails, the goddesses of love sent her an innocent smile that didn't fool her for a second, before giggling. You said it yourself, the boy is wild. If he can barely talk it means he probably hasn't seen many people in a long time, if not ever, so he wouldn't even know what a tent is. I bet you 5 drachma he panics and tries to run the moment your girls try and drag him into it. Artemis didn't know what shocked her more, the fact that she didn't consider that, or that it was Aphrodite that pointed it out to her. Quickly getting to her feet, followed by Apollo and Hermes, the goddesses of the moon, sent a respectful nod to her father and disappeared in a flash of light. But the hunters, right after Artemis left. After she was sure that her lady had left, Zoe turned to the rest of the hunter and told them their orders. Most weren't happy about it, but they would do as told. Looking down at the blonde demigod on the ground at her feet, his blue eyes never wavering from her own, the captain of the hunters glared at him. After several minuets passed she had had enough, his blank expression in the face of her glare getting on her nerves, so Zoe grabbed him by the arm and pulled him to his feet before dragging him towards Lady Artemis's tent. However, the moment the blonde seemed to realize where she was taking him he stopped, the sudden resistance almost causing the dark-haired girl to fall over before she turned to glare at him again. "Thou art to wait in Lady Artemis's tent until her return, now come." Pulling on his arm to try and make him follow her, the other hunters watching them, Zoe found it all but impossible to get him to move even an inch towards the tent. She was about to ask the other hunters to help her when without warning the wrist in her grasp was gone and, with speed that didn't seem possible, the whiskered blonde boy was running to the edge of the clearing, his injuries seeming to have disappeared the moment he hit the tree line. Cursing inside her head for letting him escape, Zoe looked to the hunters and nodded in the running boy's direction. "We must retrieve him, Our Lady ordered for him to be kept in her tent until her return. Remember not to harm him, go." Quickly doing as they were told, the group of 20 huntresses ran in the direction they saw the boy running, before splitting into 4 groups of 5 and spreading out when they lost his trail. Naruto watched from the trees as the girls split into 4 groups before silently jumping to another and following one. They didn't even notice him when he jumped down and landed behind them, keeping low to the ground and walking on all fours. They had done exactly what he had wanted them to do. Like most predators that hunt in packs, they had split into smaller search parties when they lost his trail that, while still strong, were easier to deal with than the group as a whole. He was actually surprised at just how easy it was to knock the 4 girls out, a quick knock to the back of their necks, and they fell to the ground without a sound. After that he made use of some rope he had grabbed from the camp when he ran, dragged them back to the clearing, and hung them from a tree by their feet with their hands tied. He didn't want to hurt them, just get them out of the way. Naruto repeated this action with the next 2 groups he ambushed with ease, never giving the girls a chance to alert the others before dragging them back to the clearing. But when he came to the last group, the one with the older girl with the circlet in her hair, he decided to be a little more careful. He knew from the moment he saw her that she was stronger than the others, though not as strong as the one that had disappeared, but out of the girls that had been chancing him she was the most dangerous. Sitting in a tree to the group's left, Naruto took a moment to concentrate before throwing his voice in 4 different directions at once, making the sound of footsteps running through dry leaves echo quietly. The moment they heard it, Zoe nodded to the others girls with her, who without a word, started to move in the direction of the sounds, each taking a different direction. Once again it was all too easy for him to knock out the first 3 before taking them back to hang with the others. By this time Zoe had realized that something was wrong, the fact that none of the other hunters had checked in since they had parted, making the silence in the surrounding forest heavy with tension as she looked in every direction, confirmed it. It was because of the tension in the air that she was able to do what none of her sisters had been able to. Rolling forward, the captain of the Hunter of Artemis felt something brush the back of her neck as she avoided the knockout strike. Quickly turning around in a crouch so that she was facing the wild boy, Zoe grabbed her bow with both hands and prepared to use it as a close-range weapon, all of her others being lethal. What she wasn't expecting was for the blonde to copy her stance, his own bow held in exactly the same position, with the only difference between them being the fact that his head was tilted slightly to the side as he looked at her curiously. For a moment neither of them moved, though the dark-haired girl had to suppress a flinch when the moon peeked out behind another cloud and shined on the boy's face, the light reflecting off of his eyes like an animal, seeming to make them actually glow silver. At some unseen signal, both jumped towards the other at the same time, closing the distance between them in seconds. The moment he was close enough, Zoe moved her bow so that the string was behind his head before pulling it forward and, raising her knee, slammed it into his face. Not giving him time to recover, the black-haired hunter quickly followed up by spinning on the balls of her feet and slamming the end of her bow into the side of his head, knocking him to the ground. What she wasn't expecting was for him to recover so quickly. Almost as soon as he hit the ground he was back on his feet, the small cut that had opened up on the side of his head healing before her eyes. Using her moment of shock to his advantage, Naruto looped his bow around her head and, much to her shock, did the exact same thing she had just done to him, his bow leaving a large burst on the side of her head from where it hit her. It had taken her mouths to learn that combo, the timing needed to be perfect, and if your aim was slightly off you could miss getting the string behind your opponent's head completely. How in the name of Hades had he done it? Shaking off the dizziness as quickly as she could, Zoe glared at the blonde before jabbing her bow towards his stomach, only to change direction at the last moment and hit his right foot, making him lose his balance. She then followed this up with a strike to his gut, making him bend over before finishing it by bringing her elbow down on the back of his neck. Smirking when he didn't get back up, Zoe let her muscles relax and released a sigh, confident that she had successfully knocked the boy out. Unfortunately that wasn't the case, and the moment she turned her back to him, Naruto shot up and hit her in the back of the neck, catching her before she hit the ground. Artemis wasn't sure what to think of the sight that greeted her when she returned to her campsite. She could clearly hear both Hermes and Apollo trying to hold in their laughter and failing miserably, but was too shocked to glare at them. The reason for her shock was simple: hanging upside down from several trees, their hands tied and mouths gagged with strips of fur, were her hunter. Luckily they also had some rope tying their legs together so that their skirts didn't fall down, but she could see that each of them were very embarrassed at being seen in such a state. Walking over to Zoe as Apollo fell to the ground holding his stomach, unable to hold in his laughter anymore, the goddess of the moon pulled the gag away from her mouth and after waiting a moment for her to catch her breath spoke. What happened? It was the boy. He went crazy the moment he realized I was taking him to my lady's tent and ran into the forest. We gave chance but were forced to part when we lost the trail. He picked us off one group at a time. I was careless, my lady, and allowed myself to be fooled and hit from behind, forgive me. While she was talking, Artemis cut her down and gently lowered her to the floor before moving to the next hunter, who also apologized the moment she could talk. It took several minutes to release all of her hunters, her brothers laughing the whole time much to their annoyance, until Zoe started shooting arrows at them. Closing her eyes for a moment to help her focus, Artemis turned to a tree on her left and saw the blonde boy crouching on a branch, staring at them. After about a minute passed, the whiskered blonde jumped down, landing silently in a crouch despite the dry leaves on the ground around him, before moving towards her and the two new gods, with a curious expression on his face. Looking down at him with her own blank expression, Artemis suddenly realized something she had forgot to ask him before she left, something important. What is your name? The only response she got was a tilt of the head, the boy not seeming to understand the question. Taking his silence as an insult, knowing that he could at least talk a little, Zoe's glare intensified, stepping forward and drawing his full attention to her. Your name, boy, what do people call you? Thinking back, Naruto tried to remember what people used to call him, before he came here at least, it had been so long since he had needed a name. Several things that he thought might be it came to mind, so using his ability to copy sounds, the blonde decided to go through them all to see if any were his name. Demon. Frowning slightly at the fact that the voice that answered wasn't his, but sounded more like the voice of a middle-aged man, Zoe was about to order him to stop playing, but was stopped when he spoke again, this time in the voice of a woman. Monster. Now the three Olympians were getting worried, not sure why the wild boy was doing this and not liking it. Both words seemed to hold so much hate that several of the younger hunters stood behind them flinched at the mere tone. Thing murderer beast barbarian it. Now they were really worried, none of these voices were his own and sounded like older men and women, with the exception of one that sounded like a young girl's. The voices didn't look right coming out of the young blonde's mouth and the actually words themselves didn't help at all. Creature, bastard, asshole, abomination, filth, street rat, die. Artemis could only stare at the boy in slight shock if what she thought was true and he was just copying words he had heard the same way he did the monster sounds from before, then why was he using them now, and more importantly why would he know them in the first place? Boy. It was that last one, the sound of her own captain's voice being thrown back at them, which made her realize what he was doing. Zoe had asked him what people called him and he was telling them. For a moment the impassive look she was sending him turned into a sad one, even if he was a boy. The thought of the blonde, who was still young now and had been in this forest for who knew how long on his own, would think that the harsh words were his name. Just how old had he been when hearing those words? By his appearance it was obvious that he would stand out for normal human, the mist not normally having a strong effect on the appearance of demigods, and from the voices he had been using, she could only assume they had not taken kindly to him. Was that why he was alone in this forest, to escape their persecution? Naruto. The sound of the last voice brought her out of her musings, her eyes focusing back on the blonde boy. That last one had been the only one that didn't sound like a curse or insult, if anything it held deep affection, sounding almost musical. She also knew that voice, all three of them did, though they hadn't heard it for a long time. If there was any doubt about who the boy's godly parent was before, it was blown away the moment he spoke using Pan's voice. Moving so that he was on one knee in front of the blonde, tears in his eyes at hearing his son's voice after so long, Hermes gave him a small smile. Naruto. When he said the word, the blonde stopped using the voices, to all the other hunters' relief, and looked at him with a curious expression, seeming to think it over several times in his head. Naruto. This time it was said in his own voice. 4 years later. As he made his way through the trees towards his destination, Naruto couldn't help but think back to everything that had happened after he met the hunters. He didn't know why Lady Artemis had done it, but after she had returned from her meeting on Olympus with the other gods, she had decided to keep him as a pet, at least that was what some of the older, more hateful hunters had told him. But to be honest, he didn't care even if that was true. Artemis had taken him in, trained him, taught him how to speak and use his powers, and explained to him about the gods and goddess. He owed her so much he doubted he would ever be able to repay her for her kindness. It hadn't been easy, after all he was basically the only boy traveling with a group of man-hating immortal teenage girls, but over the years some had come to accept him at least in some way. Even the older, bitterer hunters had become largely indifferent to him and had simply ignored him for the most part. That was why he had been surprised at all of their reactions when Lady Artemis had told them she was sending him away. None had been expecting it, she had just walked up to him after returning from a meeting on Olympus with the other gods and goddess and told him he would be leaving the next morning for a place called Camp Half-Blood. Apparently something was wrong with the barrier they used to keep monsters out and they were in desperate need of help, so the goddess of the moon had volunteered him. Naruto took it in his stride and without a word had started packing, not seeing the sad look on the red-headed goddess's face sent at him the moment he turned his back. It was an order from Lady Artemis, which was all he needed to know. But the next day, when he was preparing to leave, the blonde 15-year-old was shocked to see all of the hunters waiting to see him off, several giving him a hug or pat on the back in farewell. The only one he didn't see was Zoe, but seeing as she had never warmed up to him anyway that was to be expected, she had never really forgiven him for hanging her upside down in a tree. The last thing Artemis told him before he departed was that when he arrived at the camp, he was welcome to use her cabin if he wanted. Now here he was, following the instructions on the map he was given to the place marked as Camp Half-Blood. Despite how long it had been since he was living wild on his own, Naruto's clothes hadn't changed that much. He wore a brown open vest over his chest, brown pants and the same cloak he had since first waking up in that forest all those years ago. All of it was made from animal fur, because as far as he was concerned if he had to kill an animal to live the least he could do was use everything so it wasn't in vain, and his feet were bare. The only real difference was the silver bow and arrow symbol that was added to the right shoulder of his cloak, showing his connection to Artemis and the hunt. Slung over his shoulder next to his quiver was a bag made out of fur, but it wasn't just any bag. About a year ago Lady Artemis had given it to him, after making it so that it was bigger on the inside, meaning that if it could fit through the top of the bag it could fit inside it. The only downside to it was that it didn't affect how heavy it was, so the more he put in it the heavier it got. Most of his journey had been quiet, only running into the one hellhound, which was easily taken care of, but the closer he got to his destination, the more Naruto understood why he was being sent to help. In the last hour he had killed 3 cyclops, 5 hellhounds and a creature that looked like a woman with snake tails for legs that he remembered were called a dracony. The last one had been a pain to handle, mostly because she kept hiding behind trees, but he was able to kill her in the end with an arrow to her head. After that he had taken to just jumping through the trees instead of walking, deciding that it would be better if he arrived at the camp as soon as possible. He could actually feel the barrier as he passed through it, almost as if he had jumped through a wall of water but didn't get wet, and the moment he was on the other side, the sound of screams hit his ears. Without thinking he doubled his speed, using both his hands and feet to jump through the now thinning tree line, as he made his way towards the sound of terrified kids, and when he arrived a small frown appeared on his face. He saw a giant lion, with golden fur and sliver claws, surrounded by a group of kid in bulky armor that, after seeing one jump out of the way as it swiped at them, seemed to be of little use against the monster's claws. He took a moment to watch what was happening, taking note when he saw a spear bounce off of its coat, confirming his fears. One of the hunters had told him about the Nemean lion once, about how it was impossible to harm with weapons because its fur was indestructible and that its claws and fangs could cut through steel. The fact that it was here was all the proof that the barrier was weakening he needed. Despite knowing that there was a chance it wouldn't do any harm, but wanting to test a theory he had, Naruto notched an arrow on his bow and, quickly taking aim when he saw that the lion had cornered one of the campers who were fighting it, fired it straight into the beast's right eye. His suspicion was proven true when, instead of bouncing off of it like the other weapons, the arrow pieced straight through it, causing the lion to let out a loud roar of pain, its previous pride forgotten, as it turned to look for whoever had attacked it. The campers seemed to have been frozen in place, not believing that the indestructible Nemean lion had just been injured, and were even more shocked when a second arrow shot out of a tree and took its other eye, blinding it completely as it roared in pain and fury. Quickly putting his bow back in his quiver, Naruto jumped out of the tree and hit the ground running on all fours, closing the distance between himself and the Nemean lion in seconds before jumping in the air and landing on its back. Not giving the monster time to roll and crush him, the blonde brought both his hands down on the back of its neck with as much force as he could, dazing it for a moment as he flipped over its head and landed in front of it as it roared again. This was exactly what he wanted and, pulling his knife from where he kept it tied to his ankle, Naruto thrust his arm into the beast's open mouth and stabbed the roof of its mouth, straight into the brain. The other campers could only stare at the unknown blonde in complete shock, the lion exploding into a cloud of golden dust, the only thing being left behind being its pelt. They were further shocked when the whiskered teen knelt in front of the fur and started to give a quick prayer before putting it into the bag on his back before turning to face them. "Hi. After his defeat of the Nemean lion, Naruto was quickly led into the camp by a large muscular boy named Beckendorf, who it turns out was the one that had been cornered before he shot the lion in the eye. He only half listened as the boy pointed out different parts of the camp as they walked, not really caring much one way or another. Though when he saw the large forest that they used for capture the flag, he paused a moment to take it in. He could feel the small buzz of energy surrounding it, not the strongest he had ever felt, but considering it was used by the camp, more than he would have expected. He was brought to what he assumed was the dining hall, or whatever they called it, judging by the 12 long tables and the large fire pit in the middle. He saw that quite a few people were sat around, some covered in bandages, others running around trying to tend to the ones that didn't. There were also satyrs running around trying to help where they could. He also didn't miss the familiar energy of the god that was stood across the room, watching everything going on with a bored expression on his face and a Diet Coke in his hand. Then saw the skinny man next to him trying to grab a plate with a steak on it, only for the plate to fly off of the table from some unseen force. As they walked up to the table where the god and the skinny man sat, Naruto felt the eyes of everyone staring at him, or more specifically, the symbol of Artemis on his right shoulder. When they stopped in front of the table, the god finally turned his attention to the blonde, still not seeming to care about what was happening around him. "So you're the one my sister decided to send, I have heard about you. My name is Dionysus, but you can call me Mr. D, and you're Naputu, right?" Naruto. Waving his hand in the air to show he didn't really care, Mr. D turned to the skinny man, who was walking around the table with a frown on his face to stand in front of Naruto. "This is the boy I was telling you about, Tantalus, the one my dear sister has been keeping as a pet." The now named Tantalus sneered at the blonde, getting right in his face, so they were only an inch apart. "I'm not surprised, despite what she says she is still a woman, it was only a matter of time until she revealed herself as the slut she troll." Before the man could finish his sentence, he was cut off by Naruto slamming his head into his pale face, the sound of bone break, letting all of the campers watching know that the blonde had broken Tantalus's nose. Stumbling back with a hand over his face, blood pouring out from between his fingers, Tantalus gave the whisked teen a heated glare. "How dare you piece of shit." Falling to the ground, both hands now cradling his injured manhood, which Naruto had just kicked, Tantalus could only whimper as he slowly crawled away from the blonde, whose face was still expressionless. It was then that something odd happened. Naruto felt a small burst of energy around him, before without warning wildflowers burst out of the ground at his feet in a circle. Turning to look at the others around him, Naruto followed their shocked gazes to see a green light above his head in the shape of a horn, before it disappeared. Looking to Mr. D, who was slowly standing to his feet, Naruto saw that his bored expression had been replaced with a small, genuine smile. "I present to you all Naruto, son of Pan, the god of the wild. And only male to ever be a part of the Hunters of Artemis." The moment the words left his mouth, Naruto saw every satyr in hearing distance faint at the same time, falling to the floor with a dull thud. Chapter 3: An Unlikely Friendship. As he walked through the camp, Naruto could feel the eyes of every demigod, satyr and nymph following his every move. It didn't help that since he was claimed, wildflowers kept popping up where he walked, which according to Mr. D, should stop in a few hours, a day at the most. Though he would admit to himself that the looks on their faces when he had dropped his bag off in Artemis's cabin was funny, even after they had been told he was part of the hunt and saw the symbol on his shoulder, apparently they had been expecting him to come out as a jackalope. Beckendorf, who he now learned was a son of Hephaestus, was appointed as guide while at the camp by Mr. D. The boy really was big, standing at about a head taller than the blonde, his black hair cut short and large arms covered in muscles from working in a forge all day. He definitely looked the part of a son of the god of the forge. He led the blonde on a detailed tour around the camp, explaining what things were and the rules he would need to know. But the fact was Naruto didn't really care about the training equipment or the rules for the chariot races. He had been sent to help defend the camp until this Claris came back from her quest for the Golden Fleece. The monster attacks have been getting more and more frequent ever since Thalia's tree was poisoned. The barrier is getting weaker by the day. We have about 3 days left before it completely fails and the camp is overrun. Turning to look at the larger boy with a serious expression on his face, the whiskered teen grabbed his shoulder, stopping their walk in its tracks. "Thalia's tree?" His confusion quickly being replaced by understanding, Beckendorf quickly told him the story of Thalia's tree, leading him to it while talking, and Naruto couldn't help the sadness he felt at hearing what had happened to the girl. His memories of his time in the forest before the hunt found him were foggy, to say the least, but he did remember the 3 children that had stumbled into his clearing, trying to outrun a pack of hellhounds. He didn't say anything as he listened, a small scowl crossing his lips when he was told of what had happened to Luke. Another shame, he had liked the boy. The moment they were inside of the large tree, Naruto knew exactly why he was sent here to help out of all the others in the hunt. It was in a terrible state, what few leaves that were still attached were a sickly yellow, the bark had turned almost black, and the ground around the base was covered in dead branches that had fallen off. When he got closer, the son of Pan also noticed that thick purple goo was oozing out from between the cracks in the bark in several places. Slowly reaching forward to place his hand on the tree, Naruto was stopped by Beckendorf grabbing his wrist and shaking his head before gesturing to the purple goo. "See that purple stuff, it's poison, if you touch it, you'll die." Nodding in gratitude for the warning, Naruto leaned forward before taking in a deep breath through his nose, taking a moment to think about what he could smell before nodding to himself. "Get me every satyr and nymph you can find and get them here right now." Realizing what he was planning, at least to some extent, the son of Hephaestus shook his head, getting the blonde's attention. They already tried everything they could and it didn't even slow it down. "Just get them here as soon as you can." Shrugging his shoulders, Beckendorf walked away to do as asked, leaving Naruto with the tree. It took longer than he would have liked to assemble all of the satyrs and nymphs, but he was happy they had come. After taking a quick head count, the blonde knew he had 31 satyrs and 48 nymphs, not to mention about half the campers that had come to see what he was going to do. Even Mr. D had come to see what all of the commotion was about, a Diet Coke in hand and a bored expression on his face. While he had been waiting, Naruto had cleared all of the dead leaves and branches from around the base of the tree, being careful not to touch any of the purple goo while doing so, and had piled it out of the way for what he was going to do. He didn't miss the looks both the satyrs and nymphs kept sending him, a mixture of worship and shock that he even existed, not that he could blame them. Until today he didn't know who his godly parent was. He had asked Artemis if she knew once, but her answer had been an explanation about how knowing who it was would increasing his scent to monsters. After that he didn't ask again, but now he knew he was the son of the god of the wild. Turning to look at the gathered people, Naruto decided to get things started. "I want the nymphs to sit in a circle around the tree, get as close as you can, and link hands so that it is a solid circle." The moment the words left his lips, the group of girls did as he asked, several sending him flirty looks as they did that the blonde didn't understand. When they had done that, he turned to the satyrs. "I need you all to form another circle outside of the nymphs, you don't need to be touching, but make sure you are spaced out evenly." Again his order was followed instantly, the satyrs practically tripping over each other to get in position. Nodding to himself when that was done, Naruto pulled off his cloak, leaving him in his sleeveless fur vest, his panpipes hanging around his neck. Walking forward so that he was inside the circle of nymphs, Naruto took his pips off from around his neck before looking at the satyrs again, his eyes hard. "I need you all to play your panpipes in perfect sync, not a note out of place, and to direct your power into the nymphs. I then need the nymphs to focus that power into me while I play my pipes, and I will focus my power into the tree." For the demigods that had gathered to watch, this made no scene at all, after having already seen the satyrs and nymphs try similar things already with no results, but for the gathered nature sprites and satyrs, it made them widen their eyes in understanding. As it was, none of them were powerful enough to affect the poison inside Thalia's tree, but if enough of them all worked together, and with the son of Pan to act as a focal point for that power, it might just work. Without waiting to be told again, the gathered satyrs pulled out their panpipes and started playing a slow, mournful tune, the sound of all of them playing together filling the air. They did this for about 2 minutes, making sure they were all in sync and building up their power, before directing it to flow into the nymphs. The moment the power started to flow into them, the girls started to sway and hum along to the music, their voices adding to the sounds in the air perfectly, until they were ready and started to focus it to the blonde teen. As this was happening, Naruto stood perfectly still, mentally preparing himself for the rush of power he was about to feel, his pipes at his lips in preparation to play and eyes locked on the tree. It felt like a wave had crashed into him, filling him to the brim, and for a moment Naruto feared it would be too much for him to handle. But the feeling passed, and after taking a deep breath he was able to calm the power inside of him and started to play his pipes. He was so focused on his work that Naruto didn't even notice the red tribal pattern spreading over his face, his eyes actually glowing with power. For the demigods that were watching the sight before them, it was nothing short of amazing, the music seeming to fill them with hope that had been missing inside them since Thalia's tree had been poisoned. It was hard to explain it, but it seemed to fill them with energy. Several of the younger kids gave into their instincts and ran forward to dance around the tree, only to soon be joined by older campers a moment later. It started off slowly at first, looking like little more than the rustling of the few leaves that were left on the tree in the wind, except there was no wind. Then suddenly they started to change color until they were a healthy green, more and more growing back around them, and the process was getting faster and faster. This was followed by the bark changing from black to a light healthy brown, the purple goo slowly starting to be sucked back inside as if it was never there. About 10 minutes after it had started, the tree looked almost as good as new, though several of the roots didn't lose the blackness and still oozed purple goo. Naruto was about to stop the process, knowing that it had gone about as far as it would go, when something strange happened. Several of the roots seemed to start shifting around, looking almost like a mess of snakes, knotting and unknotting around themselves. After a few seconds of this happening, the blonde teen was able to see something being pushed out from between the roots until a very familiar girl, completely covered in mud from head to toe, was pushed out onto the ground at his feet. After everything had calmed down, the sight of Thalia being brought out of the tree a little too much for some of the campers and satyrs causing them to faint, Naruto carried the unconscious daughter of Zeus to the big house. It took several hours for the children of Apollo to finish their test to make sure she was okay, the sun having set and the stars out in the night sky by the time they were done. Apparently the tree wasn't the only thing that had been healed by the satyrs and the nymphs working together. Because she was technically the tree at the time, Thalia had been healed before the tree had kicked her out. The barrier was unaffected by her freedom, though the poison was still causing problems. They had brought themselves another week at most before it failed. Mr. D had even come along, though for reasons Naruto didn't understand he seemed to only be interested in how old she was now, which according to one of the sons of Apollo was just over 16, and after that he seemed to lose all interest in her and walked away. According to Will Solace, the head of the Apollo cabin, Thalia was in a deep sleep and would remain in it for the next few days. Despite the fact she was healed, her body needed time to recover from the shock of being turned back into a human, though how the boy knew that Naruto didn't know, and a few days of sleep and she would be as good as new. It wasn't a coma, but it was as close as you could get without it being so. When he left the big house, leaving Thalia in the care of Will and his sibling, Naruto was surprised to see Beckendorf stood on the porch waiting for him. I haven't spent that much time with Annabeth or Luke, but I remember him telling a story around the campfire one night before he was sent on a quest for a golden apple. He told us a story about a wild boy with blonde hair that they had met a few months before coming to camp. Said they stayed with him for an entire week in a clearing in a forest, that he gave them food, clothes and a warm blanket. But then one day a group of monsters came and the boy made them run while he held them back, sacrificing himself so that they could escape. That was you, wasn't it? Without turning to look at the taller boy, Naruto moved to stand next to him and gave a small shrug. My life before I was found by the hunt is blurry at best, but I do remember them stumbling into my clearing being chased by a pack of hellhounds. Nodding his head, his theory being confirmed, Beckendorf got a curious look on his face before asking his next question. So what was it you had them run from? Neither could tell us. A group of Cyclops had caught their scent, I was able to draw them away and deal with them. The curious look was quickly replaced by shock at the smaller boy's words. Despite having seen him kill the Nemean lion as if it was nothing, Beckendorf was unable to wrap his head around the blonde next to him being able to deal with a whole group Cyclops at the same time at such a young age. How in the name of Tartarus did you survive a group of Cyclops at once? They were extremely stupid. Seeing that the larger boy wanted more information, Naruto let out a sigh before explaining what had happened. The first I caught by surprise before they even knew I was there, then I lead them away and killed the second as he made to grab me, the third I was able to trick into running head first into a boulder before stabbing him. The third didn't see the cliff I had run to until it was too late, and the last I pushed up before he could get his bearings. The son of Hephaestus could only stare at the sorter boy for a moment, unable to think of any words to respond to that. In the short time he had known Naruto, Beckendorf was starting to get a good idea of the sort of person he was. Despite being the son of a minor god, though the larger boy thought such things were of little consequence in the grand scheme of things, he was able to go toe-to-toe with monsters that others would find impossible for one very simple reason: he used his brain. The blonde was able to analyze and understand monsters with apparent ease that none of the demigods he had met up to this point were able to. Not even the children of Athena understood monsters like him. He used his instincts to find their weakness and used it to take down things that would otherwise be out of his league as quickly as possible. Like today with the Nemean lion, Beckendorf had never heard of anyone ever thinking to aim at the eyes or stab it inside the mouth, but when he thought about it more, it seemed like such a simple solution to a big problem. Or just now hearing about how he had defeated the Cyclopses, it was no secret that most of them had the brains of a child, though some could be the exception, so he had used that to his advantage and outsmarted them instead of just charging in. Letting a small genuine smile cross his lips, Beckendorf turned to face the blonde teen at his side and held out his hand. Charles Beckendorf, son of Hephaestus, welcome to Camp Half-Blood. Taking a moment to look at the offered hand, Naruto gave a small smile of his own before taking it. Naruto, son of Pan. Despite the fact that the barrier was mostly fixed now that Thalia's tree was almost healed, the odd few monsters were still able to get through its weak spots, not nearly as many as there had been when he first arrived, but still enough to cause problems. It was for this reason that he was now fighting against an oversized lizard, as he had heard Beckendorf say when they had arrived on the scene, otherwise known as a hydra. Despite their conflicting natures, seeing as his father represented the wild Beckendorfs was basically the representation of the modern world that was slowly destroying it, the two demigods had become fast friends. He had only been at the camp for a day and a half, but Naruto already knew that he had made a friend for life in the larger team. Even though it was a well-known fact that when you cut off one of a hydra's 9 head 2 more grow back, by the time they arrived it already had 13, one of the sons of areas that was part of the first patrol, having to cut a few off to save some of the younger campers from being eaten. Add in the fact it was the size of an elephant and it was a very intimidating sight. Turning to his friend at his side, who was holding a large celestial bronze warhammer with a long handle, a spike on one side and flat on the other, Naruto spoke quick as they moved to intercept the monster. Crush, stab, anything but cutting works, try not to get too close and keep as many of the heads in sight for as long as you can. Don't stop moving and don't focus on one head for too long, the more you move and attack the more confused it will get, use its heads against it. With the exception of the immortal head you should be able to deal with the others by crushing them with your hammer. Keep it busy for as long as you can while I go for its body. Nodding in understanding, Beckendorf hefted his hammer onto his shoulder and stared at the hydra before looking down at himself with a small frown on his lips. It felt odd going into battle without his armor, but after talking with Naruto, he couldn't deny that the blonde was right about it, only be effective against certain monster, while with others it was more of a hindrance. The fact was that the hydra's teeth and claws could cut through his armor like it was paper. But it was still odd, almost as if he was going into battle naked instead of a black sleeveless shirt and loose-fitting gray pants. Neither missed the looks the other campers were sending them as they ran toward the monster without armor, Naruto moving to all fours and running to the side to avoid being seen, before the son of Hephaestus let out a battle cry and charged straight for its head. The cry had been enough to get the monster's attention, taking it away from the girl one of its heads had been about to kill, only for one of them to be crushed by the flat of his hammer. Remembering Naruto's advice, the large team quickly moved to the right, getting a glancing blow on another head before stepping left and knocking the teeth out of another's. It was hard, keeping track of all of the heads, but he now understood why Naruto had told him to keep moving when he saw them getting in each other's way, giving him just enough time to dodge. It also held that because he wasn't cutting the heads off, only crushing them, they didn't grow back, just hung limply on the ground, getting in the live heads' way almost as much as each other. He saw one of the heads gathering fire in its mouth, meaning that it was the immortal one, and thinking quickly slammed his hammer down on the top of its jaw, forcing it closed just as it was about to breath it at him. If he wasn't in the middle of a life or death battle against a giant lizard, Beckendorf would have found the way its cheeks bulged out before it started coughing and choking on smoke. The overgrown lizard was so distracted in its attempts to kill Beckendorf that it didn't even notice Naruto sliding underneath it from behind, his knife in hand, and cutting it from the base of its tail to its chest in one smooth movement before coming to a stop next to his friend in front of his friend. For a moment nothing happened, the hydra seeming to be in complete shock before it burst into golden dust, leaving nothing but a basketball-sized head behind. Grinning at their accomplishment, Beckendorf bent down to help Naruto up before letting out a loud laugh and slinging his arm over the blonde's shoulder and with his other raised his hammer in the air. The hydra wasn't the only thing that had been too shocked to move at the two teens' actions, the demigods that had been on patrol or had run in to provide backup were staring at the two with open mouths. But when they heard the sound of Beckendorf laughing in triumph, along with seeing him raise his hammer in victory, it was like opening the floodgates. The two teens were swarmed by the other campers, all of them cheering and patting them on the backs. The son of Hephaestus didn't miss the uncomfortable expression his new friend got at being surrounded by the other campers, but it only seemed to make his laugh even more as he raised both their hands into the air in victory. Chapter 4 The Cloven Council of Elders. There are 3 things a demigod needed to know about how to fight a cyclops. The first is the well-known, and by far most obvious, fact that most have the mindset of a 4-year-old, so it is easy to outsmart them. The second was that they were able to copy people's voices to try and trick inattentive victims, luring them into a trap or making you hesitate at the killing blow. The third was something that not many actually realized, and even fewer thought to use to their advantage, the fact that they had terrible depth perception. It was for this reason, despite the fact Naruto was moving around the giant's feet while it yelled at him to hold still, that it was unable to actually grab him. The Cyclops stood at about 16 feet tall, with long black hair that fell to the middle of its back, and his face was covered in greasy spots. For some reason it was wearing what looked like a prom suit, only several sizes too small with a large potbelly sticking out and part of a rose bush stuffed into his front pocket. Darting between its legs, causing a loud ripping sound to fill the air as its already straining pants gave up and split, the Cyclops let out a surprised yell when it fell over trying to grab the blonde, only to fall on his head. The reason for this was the fact that while he was trying to grab Naruto, Connor and Travis Stoll, 2 of the whiskered teen's new friends, had tied his shoelaces together. Naruto had been introduced to the twin sons of Hermes by Beckendorf, and they had, in the twins' words, hit it off, whatever that meant. Unlike a lot of the other campers who didn't bother to think past killing a monster, they were actually willing to use their brains. They were smart in a way similar to him, if a little too playful for their own good, so it made it easier for them to get along. Rushing forward now that the Cyclops was down, Beckendorf let out a yell as he slammed his hammer down on its head, causing it to burst into golden dust instantly. In the few days that he had been at Camp Half-Blood Naruto, Beckendorf and the Stoles had built up a bit of a reputation, creating a little team in a sense. Despite strengthening the barrier, monsters were still able to get through, and it was getting weaker and weaker every day, letting more and more get in. So Naruto started to lead his new friends as a response team, moving to intercept any monsters that made it through before they could cause too much damage. Between Naruto's skills and speed, Beckendorf's strength and the twins' cunning, they made a strong and balanced team. Watching as the twins patted the large teen on the shoulder as he returned the large hammer to his back, Naruto couldn't stop the small smile that crossed his lips at watching his friends, chuckling when Beckendorf started chasing the Stoles after realizing that Travis had put a kick me sign on his back. The Cyclops they had just killed was only the second to breach the barrier today, so it didn't take long to dispose of it. It was an odd feeling, having friends, not to mention being round people his own gender, and that didn't shoot arrows at him if he got out of line after spending 4 years with the hunters. It was a nice change, not that he wasn't grateful for all they had done for him. He didn't miss the familiar sound of cloven hooves quickly running towards him, or the heavy panting that accompanied it. When he finally turned, it was to the side of one of the many satyrs knelt on the ground in front of him, his eyes fixed on the blonde's feet. "My lord, I come with a message from the Cloven Council of Elders. They request a meeting with you at once." Sending a confused look towards his three friends, who had stopped to look over at him when the satyr had arrived, Naruto turned back to the still kneeling goatman and nodded. "Okay." Without another word, the satyr ran off, sending the odd glance back at the whiskered blonde and leaving the 14 stood in front of pile of golden dust as it slowly blew away in the wind. Scratching his head, Naruto looked to his friends and asked them what was on his mind. "What the hell is the Cloven Council of Elders?" After getting a quick explanation about who and what the Cloven Council of Elders were, Naruto asked a passing nymph for dictions before heading off into the forest that was used for Capture the Flag games. He couldn't help but admire the trees and flowers that were growing all around him, despite the fact the campers used it on a regular basis. It was full of energy that he only felt while in the wild. It was actually because of that energy that he was such a quick healer. In the same sense that a child of Poseidon could be healed by water, Naruto was healed by being in his father's domain, which made a lot more sense now that he knew who his godly parent was. In fact, a lot of his abilities now made more sense, like how he was able to imitate animal sounds and movements, or how he always knew the best way to hunt and kill something, as if it was wired into his brain. He had actually learned to climb trees by watching squirrels, and how to track from a pack of dire wolves he had met while he was wild. The fact was that most of the things he had learned before meeting the hunt, Naruto, had got them from watching animals, though he found that it didn't work as well with humans. After being found by the hunt, Artemis had helped him to refine his skills into more practical uses. For one thing, unlike when he had first met the goddess, Naruto was able to do more than just copy sounds now, developing his power in such a way that he only had to hear something once and was able to imitate it perfectly. He could even do it with human voices, though it took a little longer for him to get it, not unlike a Cyclops. But even now, after all these years of training, Naruto felt that there was still more for him to learn. He could feel it deep inside himself, a power that he had yet to reach. Not to say he didn't try to, sometimes it felt so close the blonde thought he could literally grab hold of it with his bare hands, only for it to burst into smoke the moment he touched it. He had no idea what this unknown power was or why it seemed to be so hard to attain it, but something told him that he would one day. Until then, he would just have to make do with what he already had. As he walked into the clearing, the nymph he had gotten directions from told him was where the Cloven Council of Elders met. Naruto took a moment to take it in. For the most part it was the same as any clearing, but the thing that made it stand out was the semicircle table made from interlocking roots on the opposite side to where he had entered. Sat behind this table were 7 satyrs that looked so old the blonde teen wouldn't be surprised if half of them dropped dead any minute. They all had large curling horns, long gray beards and wrinkles covering any skin that could be seen. They were also all very fat, something Naruto couldn't help but think as being careless on their parts. After all, satyrs were technically prey, not predators, and prey should never be fat or it would be caught. If nothing else, they were living up to their name, as the Cloven Council of Elders. Naruto also knew the moment he saw the way several of the members were looking at him that he already hated a lot of them. As he moved to stand before them, the satyr in the middle of the table, who he presumed was the leader, stood up with a large smile on his face and his arms held wide as if in greeting. "My lord Naruto, it is an honor to finally meet you face to face." My name is Silenus, head of the Cloven Council of Elders. We have heard many great things about you from our younger brethren. Why am I here? His smile faltering slightly at the emotionless response, though only for a moment before it was brought back in full, as he slowly sat back down in his seat. Of course, my apologies, I am sure you are a very busy person so I will make this quick. Where is your father? Raising an eyebrow at the question, Naruto wasn't sure if they were just that desperate or that stupid. How the hell should I know? This was obviously not the answer they had been expecting. But you are the son of Pan. How can you not know? The last and only time I saw, who I only just found out was my father, was 8 years ago when he called me with hypnotic music into a forest in the middle of the night and put me to sleep. Then I woke up in a different forest with a cloak, knife, my bow and arrows, and the set of pan pipes around my neck. The old satyrs started muttering between themselves for a moment until they seemed to come to some kind of agreement and turned back to address him, Silenus still having that too nice smile on his face. I see, then if I may be so bold, we have those objects. They would go a long way in helping us to locate Lord Pan. Go fuck a goat. Blinking, as if not sure he had heard right, the old leader of the council leaned forward slightly in his seat, eye locked on the blonde. Excuse me? I said go fuck a goat, I will not give them to you. One of the other satyrs jumped to his feet, his face red and a hard glare fixed on Naruto as he pointed a fat finger in his direction. You dare go against the Cloven Council of Elders. We are the representation of Pan in his absence. If we ask you to give us something you should do it with a smile on your face you. Roar. Before he could finish his sentence, the elderly satyr was cut off by the hellhound roar that came from Naruto's mouth, freezing both him and the other elders on the spot as their instincts screamed at them, their eyes diluting in fear. It was just like Naruto had thought, they were prey, and prey would always fear a predator, no matter how smart they were. Glaring at the group of satyr, the one that had been yelling at him quickly sitting back down, Naruto bared his teeth in such a way to show his sharp canines to further intimidate them. If my father wanted to be found you would have found him long ago. The fact that he didn't even raise his voice only seemed to add to his intimidation, sending shivers down their spines and making them hunch lowing in their seats, trying to hide behind the table that separated them from the angry team before them. As if such a thing would even slow him down if he decided to slaughter them, and that would be exactly what it would be, a slaughter. To call killing such weak and pathetic creatures as these anything else would be an insult. Taking a few deep breaths to help calm himself, Naruto ran a hand through his hair before tuning his back to the 7 satyrs and started walking away. Do not call for me again, pray, the sight of you is sickening to me. Oddly enough, instead of avoiding him for what had happened with the Cloven Council of Elders, the other satyrs seemed to respect him even more than before. Apparently he wasn't the only one that didn't like the fat idiots, but as they were the leaders of the satyrs they could do nothing against them. He wasn't sure how they had found out so fast, though from what the twins had told him about nymphs loving gossip, he had a good idea, but neither did he really care that much either as he slowly made his way over to the big house. Every day since arriving at camp and accidentally freeing Thalia from her tree, Naruto made it a habit of stopping in to check on her at least once a day. She was yet to wake, though the last time he saw her, her skin was a lot less pale and she had started to stir lightly in her sleep. According to Will, these were signs that she was close to waking, though he was still unsure how much longer it would take. The room the daughter of Zeus was being kept in was bare, except for the single bed she was currently resting in, and a small table next to it, with ambrosia waiting to be given to the girl the moment she woke, and a chair set to one side. Though it did had a widow facing the majority of the camp, meaning he could see the other campers running around. The moment he entered the room the blonde walked to the boy that was currently watching over Thalia, though he seemed half asleep after sitting in the same chair doing nothing for so long, and offered to take over for a while. After the boy gave him a grateful nod and left the room, Naruto pulled a chair so that he was right next to the bed and just sat in silence. His eyes closed as he listened for any change in her breathing or heartbeat, knowing that they would alert him if she was about to wake. Better than watching her, Naruto didn't move for almost an hour. Then he heard it, a slight hitch in Thalia's breathing pattern, barely noticeable unless he had been listening for it, and her heartbeat picking up speed slightly. Opening his eyes, Naruto watched as slowly over the next few minutes the girl started to stir in her sleep, her eye flickering behind her eyelids, and finally a small groan escaped her lips. Quickly grabbing a piece of ambrosia from the table next to him, Naruto carefully placed it into her mouth, pleased to see her chewing it a moment later before swallowing it. The effects were almost instantaneous as with a gasp, Thalia's entire body tensed and her eyes shot open. Naruto sat and watched in silence as the teenager stated to look around groggily, not seeming to take anything in for a moment before her eyes cleared. When her eyes finally landed on him, Naruto noticed the slight confusion on her face, as if she was trying to remember where she knew him from, before giving up and letting out a deep breath. Where am I? Her voice was weak and croaky after not being used for so long, something that Naruto could understand perfectly, and from the way she started to cough repeatedly after getting the words out, he could only assume that her throat was dry as a bone. Slowly getting to his feet, the blonde teen left the room without a word, before returning a moment later with a large glass of water. The way the girl was eyeing the clear liquid in his hand told him he had made the right choice. He retook his seat next to the bed and held the glass to her lips, slowly letting a small trickle fall into her mouth before taking it away again. He got a grateful nod from the girl in return, but before he could even put the glass down she started speaking. "This is the camp, right? Where are Luke and Annabeth? Did they make it? Are they alright?" He didn't say anything as he waited for her to get all of her questions out, not bothered in the least by the fact she seemed to not recognize him. It had been over 4 years after all, and he was older than the last time she had seen him. When she had finally stopped asking questions and taken another drink from the glass when he offered it to her, Naruto let out a small sigh, realizing that he was going to be the one to have to explain everything to her. 2 hours later, after explaining everything he knew to the daughter of Zeus, the two teens just sat in silence. Naruto was a little surprised that she had taken the knowledge that she had been a tree for the last 4 years so well, but apparently Thalia had been slightly aware of surroundings, if only enough to understand what had happened to her. She had also been glad to hear that her friends had apparently made it to camp safely. The black-haired teen didn't even seem to care that she was now 16 years old. Unfortunately, the news of Luke's betrayal didn't go down so well. The fact that Naruto had about as much tact as a tree in delicate situations making it even harder. Though it wasn't his fault, he might not be feral anymore, but the fact was that until recently the only people he had to talk to were a group of girls, some of who were from different eras, and all of which were blunt as a spoon when it came to talking to him about something. After she had finally calmed down, the blonde then explained a few things about the camp, including the failing barrier and the quest for something called the Golden Fleece to fix it. When all was said and done, they ended up sitting in silence for several minutes, Thalia needing time to process everything she had just been told and Naruto just staring out of the window with a blank face. It was after she had calmed down that the daughter of Zeus finally took the time to look at the boy in the room with her properly. Wild spiky blonde hair, piercing blue eyes with slit pupils, 3 birthmarks on each cheek that looked a lot like whiskers, and finally a lean, well-built body that seemed the perfect combination of speed and power. Everything about him, from the wildness of his appearance to the weapons he was carrying, screamed dangerous. Thalia could have sworn she had met him somewhere before, but for the life of her, couldn't put her finger on it. After another few minutes of silence, the dark-haired girl finally let out a sigh and coughed to get his attention. "So who are you anyway? You look familiar, but I can't remember where I might have met you before. Are you a son of Hermes or something?" Turning back to face her, Naruto let out a small sigh and crossed his arms over his chest. "My name is Naruto, son of Pan, and we have met before." Raising an eyebrow when he said his father's name, putting the information in the back of her mind for the time being, Thalia waited for a moment to see if he would elaborate on the whole met before part. When it seemed he wasn't going to continue, she decided to try and push for more information. "So we have met before. You and your 2 friends came stumbling into my clearing several years back, a pack of hellhounds on your tail." The moment the words left his lips he saw the realization spread across Thalia's face before it was replaced with shock. "You're alive?" "Yes." When the tears started to fall, Naruto was worried he had said something wrong. After all, the only girls he had any experience with were the hunters, and they only cried when in pain. But before he could ask what was wrong, he was blindsided when Thalia burst from the bed and threw her arms around him, an impressive feat considering she was still supposed to be too weak to actually walk for several days. "We thought you were dead. When you ran off towards those monsters, we thought you were dead." Having never been hugged by a crying girl before, or any girl for that matter, Naruto was at a complete loss for what to do in this situation. So in the end decided that staying perfectly still would be the best, not that she seemed to actually notice. After several minutes of her crying on his shoulder, the blonde teen picked her up and put her back in the bed, her strength having left her the moment she made it over to him. Wiping the tears away from her eyes, a weak but genuine smile on her face, Thalia looked at Naruto as if he had come back from the dead, which for her was technically true. "So what happened to you, and how did you end up here?" Retaking his seat, Naruto ran a hand through his hair and let out a sigh. "After I left you, I ran straight at the group of cyclops that had caught your scent. It wasn't that hard to kill them, and technically the ground killed 2 of them when they hit it at the bottom of the cliff. For a while after that I just stuck to my clearing and dealt with the odd monster that wandered into the forest until Lady Artemis and her hunters found me." He didn't miss the slight narrowing of her eyes at the mention of the hunters or the way she gripped the bed sheet in her fists. But before he could ask her what was wrong, the door burst open and Beckendorf rushed in, his hammer in hand and a hard look on his face. The large teen didn't even notice Thalia, his eyes firmly fixed on the blonde. 6 hellhounds just broke through the barrier on the south side of camp corner and Travis went ahead to get as many of the younger campers out as they could. Without a word Naruto shot to his feet and rushed out of the door, Beckendorf right on his heels, both leaving a confused and worried Thalia, who could do nothing but watch as the door swung closed behind them. Hellhounds were one of the more common monsters in the world, most only getting to the size of a horse, though there were exceptions, and were one of the easier monsters demigods had to deal with. However, when you get more than 2 forming a pack and attacking together, things got a lot more complicated. Add in the fact that the one Naruto instantly recognized as the alpha of the pack was the size of an elephant and the 4 demigod were worried. The moment Naruto and the others were within sniffing distance, all 6 hellhounds turned in their direction, the alpha slightly in front of the others, with its eyes locked on the blonde son of Pan. It was a look Naruto had seen before, both from hellhounds and normal animals, back when he was living feral in the forest. Resting a hand on Beckendorf's shoulder and giving a small shake of the head when his friend turned to look at him, Naruto stepped forward and removed his bow and quiver, placing them on the ground. "Naruto, what in Tartars are you doing?" Ignoring his friends, Naruto took another step forward and pulled out his knife, never taking his eyes off of the giant hellhound in front of him. By this point most of the campers had arrived, watching from a distance as Naruto approached the group of hellhound with nothing but his knife in hand, wondering if the blonde had finally lost his mind. The only ones that actually knew what he was doing were the satyrs and nymphs, who could only stare in fascination as the son of Pan seemed to be in a battle for dominance with a giant hellhound. At some unspoken signal, both Naruto and the alpha started running at each other, both their respective pack, in this case Beckendorf and the twins being his, watching from behind as the two closed the distance. Naruto watched as the alpha tensed its body and jumped, aiming to pounce on him, and reacted by sliding under it. The moment he was on the other side of the alpha, the blonde teen quickly jumped to his feet and slashed its right back hip, leaving a deep cut and forcing a startled cry from the oversized dog. However, before he could get another hit in, the alpha turned around and batted the knife out of his hand with its front paw, forcing him to back away in order to avoid the other swipe aimed at his chest. They started to circle each other, eyes locked as they tried to get a feel for the other, both snarling with their teeth bared. Deciding to make the first move, Naruto crouched low to the ground before jumping into the air right as the alpha pounced. Doing a flip, Naruto landed on the hellhound's back and without hesitating, laced his hands together and slammed them into the back of its head. Unlike when he had done this to the Nemean lion, this time it did more than simply daze the monster, forcing it to lose its balance momentarily and fall to the side. Jumping off just before it hit the ground, Naruto quickly slammed both his hands onto its neck, his teeth bared. The moment the alpha regained its bearings, it started to struggle and tried to get up. Roar. Only to freeze when Naruto gave a perfect imitation of a hellhound's roar and a moment later it let out a small whimper. The moment the sound reached the other hellhound's ears, they let out whimpers of their own before turning on their tails and running away, the barrier shimmering as they passed through it. What if Artemis finds Naruto in the Forest of Death? And thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel and leave a like if you guys need the next part, comment down, and thanks for watching the video and see you guys in the next video.